there's no doubt I have a predisposition to depression. But I think ultimately the main thing was probably a crisis of meaning, that I was busy and outwardly successful and ticked the boxes, but it wasn't quite, it didn't really resonate from a sense of purpose. And so that was, I guess, one of the really key elements of writing the first book was, how do I use this experience and share other people's experience to help others? And that really helped, having that sense of mission to complete it, and it was bigger than me.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome to this episode of Better Thinking Podcast. Before we get into it, I want to tell you about our recruiting for strategic psychology is open for 2020. So if you're a registered psychologist or a clinical psychologist and you want to work as part of a larger team, get in contact with us. Go to neshnikolic.com or strategicpsychology.com.au/careers for all the information there. Guest for the podcast is Graeme Cowan, who is an incredible man who's gone through a journey of depression and major depressive episodes, one in particular leading to suicidal ideation, and we go into that in quite detail. He talks about his research and his journey as to finding out what is it that is missing in the workplace in particular around resilience. And this episode is really about what he's learned and some of the lessons he's put together in training others or teaching others or exploring with others, particularly within workplaces, about how they can go out and do self-care for themselves so they don't find themselves in a situation like he did himself. So it's one worth listening to. There's a lot of suggestions and ideas along the way, so make sure you listen through all the way to the end.
Welcome back to Better Thinking Podcast. I'm very excited to have Graeme Cowan here as our guest today to talk about his lived experience, both in terms of his life and the amazing work that he does in resilience training these days, and being a board director and help starting the Are You OK phenomenon that I know everyone's aware of, and it's done exceptional work. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today, Graeme. So thank you for coming along.
My pleasure, Nesh. Really lovely to join you.
Tell me a little bit about your story, if that's okay. Obviously, there's a few hats that you wear at the moment. Kind of jumped out at me in doing my research to getting guests on the show. And I think there's some nice stories that I suppose have come out of your journey of hope, at least the way that I look at it. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about you and how you got to this point.
Yeah, sure, Nesh. I had a great childhood growing up in Taree in the north coast of New South Wales, and was a real country boy. Had a great life there in terms of sport and school and friends. Came down to Sydney to go to university, and that was a big change because I'd been a big fish in a little pond in Taree, and then being a little fish in a big pond in the university in Sydney. And to be honest, that's when I had my first bout of depression, even though I didn't know what that was. I was 21 years old, I guess a little bit isolated, not so much isolated, but just feeling a bit lost, I think, And I had a bad episode then, but I didn't even know what to call it then. We didn't even discuss it as depression then.
Why do you think it was difficult to even recognise it as that? So, I mean, obviously on reflection you call it that, but back then it wasn't something that you could kind of put your finger on.
No, well, this goes back a while. Like I'm 61 now, so this goes back to 1977, and there was nothing like Beyond Blue or Black Dog or anything like that. It just wasn't known. I honestly hadn't heard of it, and luckily I got over it spontaneously, and then in my life I've had this sort of, I guess, cycle where I've had good success at work, but I've also had these times where I got stressed and had some really bad episodes, and I probably had 5 major episodes of depression in my life, and the really worst one started in 2000, and I was in a senior leadership role with a management consulting company, and the business really collapsed around the tech crash at that time, and I really collapsed. And even though I'd had episodes of depression before, this was a whole another ballpark. So, I really thought I'd tried everything. I went through lots of different types of medication. I went through trying different types of psychotherapy. I had shock treatment, hospitalizations, even suicide attempts, and I was really 110% convinced that I wouldn't get better. I really lost complete hope, and it was just, I guess, fortuitous. During that time, I lost my job, my marriage broke up, and I became estranged from my kids. But I did have amazing support from my parents, and I went and lived with them for probably about 18 months. It was in a coastal town called Foster, and I did gradually come back from that, and it wasn't any quick recovery. There was good care, but it was really resolving to walk every day was a really key component for me. It was, reconnecting with family and friends, because I'd really isolated myself. I felt really ashamed, as many people do when they're going through that sort of struggle. And then I was able to embrace meditation, and I tried to meditate when I was depressed, but just wasn't able to do it. But because I'd sort of bounced back a bit in terms of my mood, I was able to meditate, and that's become a really regular ritual for me. And it's not the only thing, but it's a really pivotal component of my well-being is regular meditation. And I gradually came out of it, and then I had this idea to write my first book, which was called Back from the Brink. And I interviewed, this was an Australian version, so I interviewed, some well-known Australians, people like the ex-West Australian Premier Jeff Gallup, a couple of Olympic gold medalists, Petria Thomas and John Conrad's, the icon of the art world, Margaret Olley, who's since passed away, and Australia's most famous poet, Liz Murray, who's also unfortunately passed away. And I had John Brogden, the former New South Wales opposition leader, launch it. He's now the chairman of Lifeline. And the book did really, really well. I think it had well-known people. And I did a whole lot of interviews around that. And that led to me, people asked me to come and talk. And ironically, it was often in regional areas. And what I came to understand was that, people in those communities often don't have regular or easy access to psychologists like you, or psychiatrists especially. And they often really yearn for it. And, there were some amazing events. Like I remember going to an event at Gundawindi, near the border of New South Wales and Queensland. Little town, I don't know, about 3,000 people. You get 600 people turning up to an event. And I had a corporate career. I worked with Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, and then AT Kearney and Morgan & Banks. And probably about 8 or 9 years ago, I went to the corporate world and said, want to talk about, resilience, stress, well-being, depression. And everyone back then said, oh, we don't have any problems with that. No issues whatsoever.
Doesn't exist here.
It doesn't exist. No one's stressed. You're all just imagining it.
What are you talking about?
But as you'd be aware, there's been a lot of change, particularly in the last 5 years. There's been recognition not just of the cost of it, and that's probably sadly something that's had a huge impact, is working out the huge cost involved in employee distress, but also working out the cost in terms of the ability to change an organisation, the ability to be more productive. And so it has really resonated. And so over the last 5 years, I've really made an evolution towards working with leaders and teams on how they can be more caring, resilient, and growth-oriented. And I really believe that future-ready leaders have to build resilient teams. And the first component of that is being resilient yourself and learning how to be more resilient yourself, and then how to foster an environment that builds team resilience, and then also knowing how to help someone who's struggling. And along that journey, and it was really after 10 years ago, Gavin Larkin, who had the idea for starting Are You OK, heard about my book and said, I'd like to talk about being part of an ambassador for Are You OK? And when I heard about it, I just knew intuitively that it was the right strategy, because I knew how important the support of my parents was to my recovery. And I just felt that, building up the skills and knowledge of those surrounding those who were struggling was a really important missing component. And that's proven to be correct. We've just been blown away by how the reach and impact of Are You OK has grown. And we just had recent figures back from 2019 and found out that 87% of Australians are aware of Are You OK? And 28% participated in an Are You OK event this year, so it's just amazing.
It's phenomenal.
It's amazing.
Something that strikes me so much about your story is he's someone who on the outside has gone out and climbed the ranks as in impressive organizations, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, as an executive on the outside appears that everything's going, well. And we all know, air quotes, executives are doing well. They're the leaders. So they must be therefore managing and they're the top ones who are managing and coping well. Yet here's an experience of major depression and I'm not sure whether this is accurate in your story, but your marriage broke down, you lost your job, you became estranged from your kids. Is that all as a result of the major depression, the episode? Is that kind of the fallout of what happens when it gets that dark?
Yeah, it was certainly a huge contributor. I don't think you'd say it's entirely the issue, but, it was a major, major contributor. And it is, it's almost surreal talking about those years now, because when you're in that space, things just seem so hopeless. And you just think very much in black and white terms. You don't see possibilities. And it is like a shutdown. It is like a shutdown. And it is so important that people do really keep up rituals to keep themselves in what I call the green zone, which is a positive mood, because, and you would know this, Nesh, from your work, that it's actually easier to stay in the green zone than to try and climb out of the red zone. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's quicker. And we can get lost in the busyness of life. But my real message to everyone is that, self-care isn't selfish. We can't help others if we don't look after ourselves. And it's not big changes we need to make in our lives. It's little consistent rituals that are really important to, staying in a positive mood.
And I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes our focus is on what do we do when we're in the red zone rather than, identifying what are we doing when we're in the green zone that keeps us in the green zone, because it's a whole different trajectory and a whole different level of effort to try and climb out of the red zone. Would it be okay, Graeme, if I were to share the letter that you wrote? I know that it's been sort of published, but is that something that I can
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
share with the listeners? And this is really for listeners' benefit, to try and appreciate what does it look like being in the red zone. And so this is a letter that obviously you wrote at one of your darkest times, which is a suicide letter. If you just bear with me, I'll just read it. It says, "My dear family, after 4 long years of battling with this illness, I just can't take it anymore. I feel I have tried everything and just can't see anything but a depressed future. I would like to thank everyone for the loving care you have all shown me. I couldn't ask for anything more. Please don't blame yourselves in any possible way for this, as there is nothing possibly that you could have done. Love always, Graeme. P.S. I just can't be a burden any longer." It's a very powerful letter. A lot of hurt in there.
Yeah, it's as I said, it's quite surreal. When I think back to that time, it was just so palpable, real, and hopeless. But I had published that letter in my first book, which came out 12 years ago. So it had been in the public domain all that period of time. But as you know, Nesh, I decided to, even though it had been in the public domain, I decided to share it on LinkedIn this year on World Suicide Prevention Day. And I decided to do that for two reasons. One was I felt that there were probably people that could be feeling really distressed and vulnerable, and just to know that someone else once felt like that, but now has a really meaningful and full life. And then the second thing was just to really prompt people to say, if you think your loved one could be in this place, don't hesitate but to ask, are you okay? Because that conversation could change your life. And I didn't know what would happen when I put that on LinkedIn and Facebook, but it went, as you know, it went viral. It had 70,000 comments and views in 18 hours. And the overwhelming message, which I guess just really gave me greater resolve in the work that I do, is that people wanted to see change in the workplace and the community. They wanted to see more authenticity. They wanted the chance to be themselves. They wanted to be able to talk about what's really going on. And I think, particularly in the workplace, there's a lot of this putting on the mask and, having a positive face. And there's many, I don't want to say that work is all bad. I truly believe on the well-being benefits of work. But, but overwhelmingly, people wanted to see this change. They really wanted to see that there was a greater level of transparency and talking about that. So, as I said, I didn't know, and it ended up being picked up by the ABC. A journalist asked me, your letter just seemed really coherent, and was it a spur of the moment thing? But no, it wasn't. It was something I had literally felt that my life had no hope for about 18 months, and so I thought about it a lot. So anyway, it's a period that is hard to imagine, but if you have any of your listeners that have been there or somewhere like that. I just want people to know, and that's why I wrote my Back from the Brink books, is that, there is a great life, a meaningful life. And I think often we find our purpose and our lessons from some of the toughest things we go through. And that was certainly the case for me.
That's what was so attractive in reaching out to invite you to the show, is that here's this situation where, there's such great and immense despair. And there's really a story of hope that's come out of this. I think I read that the treating psychiatrist at the time spoke about how your depression is one of the most severe he had seen, and you had tried everything and anything under the sun, and you were motivated, engaged to try and feel better and get better and work on it. Yet here we are, at this point of this letter is, 4 years on. That's not 4 years without trying. That's giving it your all and feeling kind of that you've got nothing more to give, and that it's not going to get any brighter. Yet here we are having this conversation that you've been able to come back from the brink, as the title of your book says. One of the things that I'd like to hear more about is upon reflection now, what do you think it is that brings us back from, or could potentially bring someone back from the brink? What have you learnt from this journey? What have you learned from talking with others? What does your experience being part of the, are you okay phenomena? What has all of this taught you? What have you learnt about how workplaces, discuss, mental health or resilience? I'd love to hear your views.
Yeah, I think one of the things about going through that really dark time is really reflecting a lot about yourself and what's important to yourself. And every person is individual. So I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of assessments and that sort of thing, because I'd been in recruiting before, and so I really valued some of the insights that come from strengths profiles and values profiles and that type of thing. And I think ultimately, in retrospect, and there's no doubt I have a predisposition to depression, but I think ultimately the main thing was probably a crisis of meaning, that I was busy and outwardly successful and ticked the boxes, but it wasn't quite, it didn't really resonate from a sense of purpose. And so that was, I guess, one of the really key elements of writing the first book was, how do I use this experience and share other people's experience to help others? And that really helped, having that sense of mission to complete it, and it was bigger than me. And that also then very easily segued into helping to start Are You Okay? And seeing that happen.
How do you think you lost that direction? I think watching one of your videos, you said something like, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. It's kind of like until you kind of, it dawns on you, or you get knocked about that you can't see that anymore. How did you get lost and then kind of realize that you've lost your direction or your purpose or your compass?
I in the that really bad episode, I think I just there was this unease. I wasn't quite well with myself, but I decided that the solution was to keep pushing and to try and push through the pain barrier and not really seek help or, discuss it well. And I know back then, for example, I had friends, but they weren't friends that I had what I would call meaningful conversations, where you had vulnerability and that sort of thing. And I think that was a really key element. And so you keep on pushing, and then the stress and depression sits in, and then you start to lose sleep. And when you're not sleeping well, combined with the stress, this just compounds and compounds and compounds. And then you're this really stressed, but you can't sleep, and tired, but you can't sleep. And it's this compounding thing. And I didn't really recognize the signs to prevent it. It was a proverbial boiling frog, when by the time you knew, it was too late. And I think a really important element now of self-care is being able to recognize those early warning signs, being able to take corrective action, being able to, decide they're going to pull back. I'm going to make sure that if I've stopped meditating, that I am going to get back into meditation, that I'm going to get my morning walks in nature. But what I've evolved to, and it might be just worth mentioning this because it works for me, and it's what I talk about in my workshops, is I tell people you should act like a VIP. And what that means is there's three components of well-being or resilience in terms of the research I've done. And the first thing is V for vitality. So this is our physical health, getting enough exercise, getting good sleep and good nutrition. So that's the vitality side of it. The next part, the I, is for intimacy, our emotional health, our relationships, and making time, regular time, for the people that are good for us. We all have people in our life that suck the life out of us. But what about those people that are good for us? Be it our spouse or partner, be it our friends, be it our family. And I think what really galvanized me about the importance of this was something called the Harvard Grant Study, which is the longest wellbeing study ever done. They monitored 240 sophomore men, because this is 1929. Followed them. Well, they've been following them ever since, and that's now 75 plus years.
Wow.
And there's now just, I think, about 20 alive. But and there's a TED talk on it. But they have terabytes of information on all this group that followed every year. They've got interviews with them, their family, and their one conclusion is those that have the longest life, the most affluent life, the longest sex life, the most meaning in life are those that have caring and supportive relationships, and good caring and supportive relationships. So that's why the I is so important. And the final part, P, is for prosperity, and this is our contribution energy or well-being or resilience. And this happens through the work we do for the outer community, the work we do in our vocation, the work we do in our charity work, the work we do, working for schools or sporting teams or whatever. And we need to, I talk about that being, each of those components, the VIP, as being like 3 glasses of water. And it's like they're sitting outside in the sun. And if we don't actively top it up, they continually evaporate. And we have to have each of those glasses full. We can't be fine in one and empty in one or two others. We really need to strive to top them up regularly. And so acting like a VIP is consciously thinking each day about, how am I topping that up? Am I getting in my 30-minute walk each day? Am I having a call with what I call my care crew? Those people that have my best interest in heart, that I feel better being with. And whether it's a 5-minute phone chat or a catch up for a coffee or a beer or whatever. And then in my work, am I living to my purpose? Am I using my strengths to the best of my ability? And on that peer prosperity side, there's just lots of evidence that show that if you do have that sense of purpose, if you are able to uncover that sense of purpose and use your strengths to put it into action, all the research shows that does also lift our motivation. It lifts our sense of well-being. So all those three things together are critical. And in my workshops, I have, a VIP snapshot, self-care snapshot, where there's 5 questions in each of those 3 categories: the vitality, the intimacy, and the prosperity. And so people can readily see which is their emptiest glass. And I just say, well, as you think about things I talk about today, and you think about one action you might take from today, think about your emptiest glass, because that's probably the best place to start.
It's very fascinating because actually this morning I was speaking with Professor Alan Castel from UCLA about memory. He's an expert in memory, particularly in aging. Written a book about successfully aging, and one of the primary things, the best things you can go out and do to have a sharp memory as it changes in adult age, in older age, is to go out and have vitality, as you call it. He spoke about being active and engaged, on a physical level, not necessarily exercise, but just being physically active. And obviously that does involve, moving your body. And the other one was connection. Which obviously is intimacy. This is this undeniable constant verging of these same concepts coming together, whether it be memory or in what we're talking about, well-being and being the best version of yourself, so to speak. To rather than falling down into the black hole, staying in the green zone, these things keep coming up. So it's just fascinating to kind of reflect on that, in both this morning and today, the same stuff is coming up.
Mm-hmm. And, I have no doubt that there is overlap, and, work is really good for us if it's the right work. There's a Gallup study that surveyed 95-year-old men, and that's pretty old for a man. And the average age they retired was 80 years old. Work, and there's actually evidence that shows the younger you retire, the younger you die. So I say that to people that think that, retirement is the nirvana. Well, only if you want to live shorter life.
That's good news for me, because I don't plan to retire. I enjoy being involved. I like to be doing things, and to me, retirement's probably retirement from paid work, but I can't see a time where I'm not going to be wanting to do something. I think that purpose and drive is important. It is my mental health. If I've got nothing on a weekend, I slump. I'll get depressed real easy. Obviously not on a clinical level, but in terms of my mood flattens. I feel empty. I feel like I'm not using my time wisely. And really, I don't even mind. Let's just catch up with some friends. Or I've got to do some gardening. Something has to be happening. I've got to play with my kids. I've got to do something. If I'm just sitting around, feeling like I'm treading water, that's not healthy. I don't know if the same thing is occurring, with gender differences or with age differences, whether that changes or moves, but certainly for me, it's a big thing. Is there a gender difference there? You're talking about, obviously, with that particular cohort of men who are 95, their average retirement was 80. Is that the same for women as well?
Well, I think, traditionally women didn't work as long, and that's changing now, of course, but traditionally there were more traditional gender roles historically.
Yes.
But I'm sure intuitively I just think the same thing would apply, because it is, and it doesn't have to be, as you say, it doesn't have to be paid work. It can be charity work. It can be, doing meaningful work with grandkids. But it is that connection. It is getting outside and getting outside the four walls. And just having meaningful discussions. There's and you may have heard of this, there's a very good book, an associated TED Talk by a guy called Johann Hari, and it's called Lost Connections. And,
It's brilliant.
it is brilliant because it really challenges this whole notion of depression being, a deficiency in serotonin, and you top up serotonin and everything's fine. And that was certainly my case as well, because I tried, of course, all those drugs, and for some people, it can play a really important role. So I don't say you dismiss it, but it's not the whole picture by any means. And as you know, in his book, he really outlines the evidence about how disconnection from meaningful work, disconnection from meaningful relationship, disconnection from nature contribute to poor mental health. And I think intuitively we know that, but he then lists some pretty compelling stories and studies that support that.
I think you're absolutely right, and medication shouldn't be dismissed. Having an appreciation of both the environment and what modern medicine can do. I think there's a professor, I think it's Joanna Moncrief, who talks about medication as a psychiatrist, and she, I think in a very clever way, talks about it as a drug model rather than as a disease model, and the drug model idea. The disease model of giving medication for depression is that there's a disease and you go out and give the medicine to fix the disease. The drug model goes out and says, we're going to use a drug that's a mind-altering drug, and we're going to try and shift one's mood, one's experience, using the effects of drugs. And so we can apply this with quite great appreciation that there's going to be a shift in the altering of the mind, and we're going to take some guesses about how that might look. And so there's an upper and there's a downer, or there's a depressant and a stimulant, is how she talks about it. And depending on one's clinical profile or how they're presenting, we're going to give a stimulant or a depressant. So it's a drug model that she is kind of referring to. And I think, there's some merit in looking at it in that way. If someone is feeling really, really, low, there are times where, a stimulant can go out and be quite useful to try and assist them out. And so she talks about, more acute periods and adding particular drugs for shorter periods rather than longer term periods. And she has some compelling evidence in her book. So, Joanna Moncrief, fantastic work that, I think she's certainly looked at, meta-analyses and the like. But, I think there's an environmental factor that you're certainly suggesting that has, a much greater compelling contribution to the story of depression or any other, mental health difficulties.
And I think it's unfortunately it's become a bit of a default response when people go to GPs and talk about feeling flat and not being able to sleep. The default is, well, I'll prescribe you an antidepressant, and that may not be the right thing to do. And then, as you know, that book of Lost Connections, they talk about, well, sometimes people have legitimate problems, which is why they're not feeling great. It's a legitimate response to what's going on. And
yeah.
I love the story in that book about Cambodia. And, they first went there promoting Prozac when it first came out. And and one of the local doctors says, "Oh, well, we've got that. We've got a cow." And the American psychiatrist said, "What do you mean? What do you mean we've got a cow?" And they explained that, they had this farmer who worked in rice paddies who tragically travelled on a mine and blew off his foot and lower limb. And he could no longer work in the rice paddies. So he was really depressed. he couldn't support his family, couldn't do anything. And so the villagers got round and just brainstormed and said, well, what about if we got you a cow? And that way you could milk the cow, you could sit on a stool and milk the cow. And so that's what they decided to do. So they milked the cow. The guy then had a sense of purpose and was able to solve what was a really significant problem in his life. And so the cow was the antidepressant because it solved a legitimate problem.
The prescription of a cow. I'm going to prescribe you a cow. Go to the chemist and we'll pick you up a cow. But it's interesting. It's very hard. I think the hardest job in the world is for GPs. There's so much expectation on, I'm here for a service, and the way that we've traditionally, I think, used the GP service is, a crises model, and it goes out and kind of says, I'm not well, make me well. Give me some antibiotics, and in some sense, there's an expectation of my mood is low, give me my mood tablet. And it's hard to prescribe purpose, or it's hard to prescribe connection. It's hard to, prescribe, vitality. You've got to go and kind of work on those. I think there's great there's great research in contextual. One of my passions is contextual behavioural science, and we know we can make animals depressed by put a rat in a sock. You don't let it kind of move. Give it food, give it water, give it all the other bits and pieces. But if you take its mobility away, what do you think it starts feeling?
Yeah.
Do we give it medication, or do we take the sock off?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you were talking before about prescribing, and I think what a really healthy development is, which really happened primarily in the UK, was something called social prescribing. So what a group of GPs found was that, surprise, surprise, a lot of the issues revolved around people being isolated and not having friends to talk to. And so they started prescribing them to go to community groups, to work on community gardens, to interact with people on a project on a regular basis, and had really great results. So I love that concept of social prescribing.
It's kind of like the men's shed, men who are having a tough time. Once a week, twice a week, whatever they choose, they go over to shed, they bring some stuff over, there's some tools, they have a yarn with a couple of mates. They don't have to go out and talk about how they're feeling. They fix some things, sand some things, paint some things, chop some things. A lot of men like to do that with, work with their hands. You walk away feeling better, and it's like, I can't wait to go back and have a chat with Pete next week.
Well, I have my own version of men's shed, but I'm hopeless with tools, hopeless with things like that. So my men's shed, I've been in an investment group for over 20 years with 14 guys, and we rotate around each person's home once per month, but it's a continuity thing, and it's been amazing. And we talk a little bit about shares and stuff, but it's primarily a social thing, just talking about stuff. And we've had people go through divorces and depression and physical ailments, and one is really quite disabled at the moment on kidney dialysis and this sort of thing. And it's been a mainstay in our lives, and it serves exactly the same function as the men's shed, but without the tools.
It's always felt to me like, and I know there's a lot of research in this space as well that says the same, in older age, as people genuinely become disconnected because of, loss, death, geographical changes and the like, there is a strong correlation between, aging and, levels of depression or reported depression rates. I'm convinced that it's a measure of loneliness. It's a measure of disconnection, that when we connect people together, and I know that the intent of a lot of nursing homes is to do so, but it's certainly not easy to just go out and do that, because there's obviously many other challenges that bring someone into that sort of environment. So, you know, that connection space with its shares, you know, my one's fishing. I love fishing. You know, and as you say, you don't talk much about shares. Well, we don't catch many fish.
It's not the point, is it?
No. You know, wife says, "How was fishing?" It's like, "Oh, it was great." You know, did you catch it? You know, catch what? You know?
I love it.
Well, we say we're not there for fishing because we don't catch anything. Eh? Maybe that's how it works. So maybe there's a space for social prescribing here in Australia. Maybe we can do something around that.
There is, and through my work with Are You OK, I've become aware in Australia of something called the Coalition to End Loneliness. And it's a group of charities and universities around Australia that are banding together to look at policies to help connect people together again. And it really follows off, what happened in the UK, where they actually have a Minister for Loneliness. And that person is specifically about trying to address that disconnection that causes so much psychological disorder. And, I think we can't assume that it'll fix itself. And so it is fantastic this group is set up, and I've met the scientific director of the group, and so they're really looking at evidence from around the world, what works, what doesn't, and looking at strategies and resources and groups already out there for different age groups, different demographics. And I think that is part of it, is thinking about, okay, if you're a middle-aged man and you're single, well, this could be the appropriate place for you. If you're, early 30s woman and all your friends are having babies but you're not even married, this could be for you. And just really thinking about helping people to find, something that is suitable for their life stage and life interests. There is acknowledgement by a lot of charities that this is an important social issue, and there's certainly a determination to do something about it.
Certainly, a lot of the youngsters that I see, and I don't see too many young because it's not my forte. There's better psychologists out there to see the teenagers, but the ones I've seen, are often feel excluded. They feel on the outer. That's predominantly their presenting issue. Mum and dad come along and they say, Billy or Sarah are depressed, but we quite often, not always, but we quite often see that there's very much a social component there. I'd be hard to recall a situation where it wasn't. So there's a lot to say about that. So was that called the Coalition of Loneliness? Is that what you called?
Coalition to End Loneliness.
To end loneliness. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, they've got a website, so
I'll be looking that up. Yeah, and it's put together to I suppose try and inform policy, to try and inform.
Very much so. So it's charities and academics and universities have all pooled together to work on it.
Yeah, wow! I would definitely be looking at that. I've never heard of it, so I'd love to know more about it. So the work that you're doing now, can you talk about that a little bit in terms of, who you've worked with and how I suppose your program, what it focuses on and how you see it sort of rolling out in the organisational setting?
Yeah, So I really like to, I guess, see as an outcome of teams that are cohesive, teams where people play to their strengths, teams where people feel supported. And one of the exercises that I actually run is to ask people to reflect on, a great team they've been in. And it could have been Year 9 netball or footy or, working with McDonald's or this role or a previous role. But when special things happen in that team, might not have been easy, it could have been, limitations in resources and all that sort of stuff, but still special things happen. And I ask them, what's one or two words that would describe what was unique about that situation? And it doesn't matter in what format I do it, whether it's working with a charity or with a bank or with a insurance company or a private hospital group. Always the same things come up. It's things like, we had each other's back. We had fun.
Going through hardship?
We had complementary strengths. We had a common purpose and mission. It wasn't easy, but we worked things out. We were resourceful. And so it's how people interact and support each other that are the critical elements. And so this whole area has been now coined a term which is called team psychological safety. And what that means is that there's strong interpersonal trust and respect, and people feel comfortable being themselves. And they also feel that they can take moderate risks to solve problems, show initiative to solve problems themselves, and know that if it goes wrong, that they won't be blamed for it. They're just trying things out. And so this area has gained a huge amount of profile. For example, Google started this project, Aristotle it was called, where they sought to identify what was their best teams. And they started this in 2014. They looked at 180 teams around the world, looked at 250 different parameters for each of those 180 teams. And that's what they ended up concluding, that the number one contributor of their best teams was when there was team psychological safety. That was the foundation. They identified 5 team norms. So number one was psychological safety. Number two was dependability, so they could rely on each other. Someone says they're going to do something, they'd do it. Number 3 was clarity. There was clear expectations about what was required. Number 4 was meaning, knowing that they believed in the purpose of their organisation. And number 5 was impact, which talked about their team had impact. They felt their team made a difference. And but by far the most important was psychological safety, because if you didn't have that, you couldn't have discussions about dependability. You couldn't have robust discussions about clarity. That was the underpinning thing. And so my message now is that, this care and support, this psychological safety, is foundational for high-performing, future-ready teams, because there's so much change, there's so much evolution. We don't have, a roadmap. We have to evolve, we have to learn, there's ambiguity. And we can do that if we're supported in a group, if we're in a tribe. But if we feel isolated and alone, we don't feel confident. Of course, there's a few people that do thrive in that situation, but the vast majority of us really benefit by being in a supportive group. And so, the first, in my work, the first thing is about how individuals can be in the green zone themselves, and that's following the VIP approach that I talked about before, and choosing little daily rituals that top up each of those 3 cups. The next part is, what can I do to create this psychologically and caring team that is the foundation to high performance? And, it's not rocket science. It's getting together. It's knowing each other better. It's, doing things together. It's celebrating wins. It's supporting each other when things don't work out. But believe it or not, Are You OK did a survey early this year and found out that 23% of Australian employees, that's almost 1 in 4, they feel nothing is done at all to connect them to their colleagues, not to have a coffee together, not to have, lunches at a restaurant, not to have celebrations about wins, nothing. And this is having a big impact on psychological health, but also performance and productivity. It's all linked.
It's fascinating because it's not only just connection, it's also the quality of that connection. It's to be able to have, that psychological safety. It's almost like that vulnerability to be able to be me, or to be able to express myself, to be able to be heard, to be able to fail, to be supported in that time. And a lot of that kind of occurs by having these opportunities to connect. So whether it be, and I know here in the clinic, we've spent an awful lot of time and energy and at great cost as well in how we've designed our rooms and a group room to have, a lunchroom where it's very spacious and everyone can sit down. We go out for, lunch or breakfast or afternoon drinks, every 3 weeks. We have group supervision together. We have individual supervision. We try and, do something on Melbourne Cup, and really no one's interested in horse racing here, but it was just nice to get together and have a chat and a bite, some sandwiches and it's the quality, but creating opportunities to, I suppose, nurture those relationships, to find out about each other, to take a genuine interest in each other. And I suppose by default, you end up saying things like, "Are you okay?"
Definitely. And people better. So you can observe changes. You can observe if people are moodier than normal or less reliable, more dishevelled, and you know when to ask, "Are you okay?" So, the things you describe are, just 100% on the money of creating a connecting team. But sadly, there's at least 23% of people that don't feel that any of that has done nothing.
But it is interesting because I've had to consciously, work on that, to put things in place and to sit down and think about it. Despite working as a psychologist and with a team of psychologists, it's not something that's come naturally. It's been something that you kind of mechanically do because you go, this is what you should do, or this is a good thing to do, and I'm sure that, sometime in the past, there'd be staff here saying that, no, we're part of that 23%. It's something that you kind of have to, I suppose, work on and fail, and then work on and fail, and you work on and fail. It's a hard thing to do, yet simplistic in the same breath.
Yeah. And, in the busyness of life, I think, oh, well, we haven't got time for that sort of thing. But, if you want to sustain success, it's foundational to do that.
Is that what it is? Do you think it's this busyness thing? Like, for what's your gut feel? What keeps us so disconnected?
Well, that's an interesting. There are some macro things certainly going on. There's certainly more people living alone than ever before, and so there used to be, I guess, a much greater sense of connection in home life, which there isn't now, and so we probably need it more in work life than we have before. There is more divorce than there was before. But there is this, and I put in inverted commas, busyness, but it is doing things on our phones and alerts, which have it's activity, but I'm not sure it's really effectiveness. And I think that it's interesting that. There's a guy called Nia Eel, and he wrote a book called Hooked, and it was about how Facebook and Instagram and the like created a product which hooked people and kept them coming back and involved, and it is an actual model that does make that happen. But now he's just come out with a book called Indistractable, which is how not to be distracted by all these things that can distract us, and be it apps or email or what have you. But one of the big things, and this was, I guess, somewhat surprising thing to me, one of the first things he tells us that he tells is the solution is start to get comfortable doing nothing. Because we've sort of lost the capacity to daydream. We've lost the capacity to do nothing. You know, you look on a train, people used to, I go over the train quite regularly over the harbour bridge. No one looks at the harbour. They're all busy looking at their phone. And so we have had this level of resorting to doing things because we have become uncomfortable in just being with ourselves, having that quiet time. And I think we have to re-engage with that and re-nurture that.
Do you think any of it could be our affluence? I kind of reflect on it in terms of, there's this individualistic type of society, and I know sort of my heritage is Serbian, and it's a country of not deep poverty, but reasonable poverty, and infrastructure problems and so on. And because of that, there's so much unemployment, so people are doing nothing. But by virtue of doing nothing, in some sense, you end up socializing, and you almost have to also put your resources together, because if you've got very little, you've got to make that go a longer way, and that usually means pooling your resources. Are we maybe experiencing the side effect of being comfortable, of affluence, of a first world, macro culture?
There's definitely elements of that because, we've never, Australia is the most fortunate country in the world on any dimension, whether it's income, housing, social services, public health, the list goes on. We are truly a blessed country. And yet there are many affluent people that are very unhappy, and there are many affluent kids that are even more unhappy. And I think that has been a curse where people are given too much and have had problems solved for them. And the research around resilience sort of shows this, that we have to, work things out ourselves. We have to make mistakes. We have to learn from it. We have to respond. And this helicopter parenting, where parents have tried to solve all the problems, make it easier, drive kids everywhere, take them places, make it safe, ironically doesn't do that, because they've lost their capacity to solve problems and to build resilience. Not entirely, but there's just a trend, and there is, growing levels of psychological distress in younger people, and I'm sure that's a contributor. I'm sure it is.
One of the things that's always impressed me about, in particular, our farmers, people who live more rurally, is this experience. And I don't know if this is just, my thoughts, whether it's anecdotal or whether it's genuine, but they just seem so much more resilient, I don't know whether it's, you have a little cut, someone just brushes it off because they've had 1,000 cuts in the past, as where someone else may be, in a city gets a cut and they're worried about an infection. They need to go have a looked at, what happens if it's going to swell up or something. This kind of resilience of rolling with the punches, or she'll be right. And I'm not suggesting that, that's the attitude to take, but there's probably a lot of situations where the she'll be right attitude is probably the right attitude, that it's going to go out and, make you a more buoyant human being.
Yeah, well, I just remember speaking to an ophthalmic surgeon, and he said something very similar to what you said. He said that he loves, working on farmers because they understand that shit happens. that everyone in the city expects things to be perfect, but farmers just know that life isn't perfect. And so, he loves working with them because they do have that level of adapting and, okay, this has happened, let's work it out, sort of thing.
I believe there's a study that looked at some Scandinavian countries around pain management facilities, and they had, they've got a great service over there with every multidisciplinary hat under one roof, in terms of doctors, surgeons, psychologists, psychiatrists, pain management experts, physios, and so on. And they even gave extra time, is my understanding, to annual leave if you've got a chronic pain injury. And from the study, my understanding is that they've got the worst outcomes because, and the theory is because there's not an acceptance model of that's just what it is. The idea is, no, we can treat it, we can fix it, we can make it better. And the fact is, you can't make a lot of things better. And the sooner we kind of say, my ankle is going to hurt forever, and I'm just going to have to walk with a really, really sore ankle, the better, because we can still give it 7, 8, 9 surgeries, and it's probably going to make it worse over time, rather than saying, I've now got a 6 out of 10 pain in my ankle, and I'm just going to have to do the best that I can. And this is horrible and unfortunate and very upsetting. But I've got to kind of somehow try and learn to live with it.
Yeah. I think that is very real. One of the other elements that I've been looking at recently, and it really came from my third book, where I surveyed 4,000 people and asked them, what helped best in your recovery. And I came up with a model which is called, as an acronym, I CARE. And I is how you identify people. The C is for compassion, how you put yourself in their shoes, how you ask, are you okay? How you encourage action. The A is for access experts, how you find good GPs, good psychologists. The R is for revitalising work, which means in most cases people are better off being at work than being at home, even if it means cutting back in duties or workload, but they're better off being there. And then the E is for exercise. And so we've put together, one of the things that I recently did was put together an online learning program, which takes people through this in 20 minutes about how best to be more confident to help someone in distress. And what's really, I guess, heartening is that, 94% of people who've gone through this 20-minute course say they feel more confident. And there's also, associated wallet card and booklet and that sort of thing, because, as I mentioned right at the start, there is this accelerating change and volatility in the workplace, and we must be able to have the skills to be able to reach out. And part of it is asking, are you okay? But that's only one part. First, you have to know how to identify, but then you also have to know how to guide them in the right direction, how to get that help. And in my experience, most people want to help, but they don't feel confident in how to help. And so we've recently completed trials or pilots with the University of Sydney and Ernst & Young, and we're really optimistic. We just launched it 2 weeks ago in Melbourne, and we won 2 platinum awards and a gold award in a LearnX award sort of thing. And I think this is part of our solution as well. Technology does cause issues, but it can be part of the solution as well if people can learn the right way on how to assist someone else.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Can you tell us where we can find iCare? What's the website?
Yeah. Well, if I can give you probably a good URL to find information on that. So if you go to factorc.com.au/WeCare, you'll find information about that program and how it comes together. So that's Factor C, where C is for change.com.au/we care.
Fantastic. Graeme, I could speak with you all day. I could go for another 6 hours. I wish we had the opportunity, but I know that we're running out of time. How can people find out more about your books? Where can they get them from? How can they find out about your work and where they can engage, your team, your services to look at their, workplace and the like?
Yeah, well, probably a good place is my website, which is graemecowan.com.au, graemecowan.com.au. And that's where I have, quite a few resources that people can download. I also, with my book, Back from the Brink, I have a website which is called iambackfromthebrink.com. And I share on there a chapter which is the survey of 4,000 people, which shows where I came up with this eye care model to help people. And so it talks through what 4,000 people said most helped them in their recovery. And so, yeah, that's a good resource, which is at iambackfromthebrink.com. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn as well. That's probably the best social media platform to find me or ask me questions.
Fantastic. Sounds like a number of places to go to that will be more than worthwhile. Before we finish off, I need to ask you one more question. And I hate to put you on the spot like this, but if there's someone out there that is struggling, they're having some workplace challenges, or they've lost a little bit of meaning, they're having some difficulties, whether it's something that they've sort of experienced, previously, or it's their first time around, what advice would you give them in a general sort of sense?
Well, I guess the first thing would be to share it with someone that you trust. And that's, they may or may not know that, but that's a really fundamental thing. And many men are very, very poor at doing that. Many men think, I've got to tough this out, work it out myself. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's asking that person you trust or asking your GP or your psychologist, just ask, taking one step. And, but if that's not successful, take another step, try something new, because we don't always find the perfect GP or psychologist first time. So don't be afraid if it doesn't work out the first time to keep looking. But and I guess the third element, and this is just really from my own experience, is if you're not moving, start moving. To be walking at least for 30 minutes every day, brisk walk. Because Mayo Clinic research shows that if you do that, your mood will be better up to 12 hours later by having that 30-minute brisk walk every day. And things can seem so much better when your mood is better, when it's a bit higher.
Wise words. Thank you very much, Graeme. I feel very privileged to be able to pick your brain and hear about your story and the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you very much, and look forward to maybe having you on later on for further discussion on all these amazing pieces of research that are coming through and the fantastic work that you're doing.
Thanks very much. It's really appreciate the chance to speak with you and your listeners, and really admire the work you're doing. So well done.
Thanks, Graeme. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.